The family courtroom was far from glamorous. Fluorescent lights hung overhead, bouncing off dull cream-colored walls lined with framed portraits of stern judges from decades past. A smell of old paper, ink, and faint coffee lingered in the air. Rows of wooden benches creaked as family members, lawyers, and curious onlookers shifted in their seats, waiting for the next case to unfold. At the center of the room sat Judge William Hargrove, a man in his early 60s with thinning white hair and a face etched by years of dealing with disputes that blended heartbreak and bitterness. To him, cases like this were routine: custody battles, accusations, defenses, promises, and tears. He had seen it all, or so he thought. Across the courtroom sat a small girl, no more than 9 years old. Her legs dangled nervously from the witness chair, feet unable to touch the floor. She clutched the wooden armrests tightly, her knuckles pale. Her brown eyes darted around the courtroom, but kept returning to the judge, as though she knew her words would matter more than anything else today. Her father sat on one side of the room, arms crossed, expression hardened. He had already spoken about why he believed the child should live with him. He argued that the girl's mother was unstable, unreliable, and incapable of providing a secure home. His lawyer had leaned into that argument, painting the mother as a mystery, someone who disappeared too often, someone who wasn't around enough. The girl's mother, however, sat quietly at the opposite table. She wore a simple blouse and black slacks, her posture straight, her face unreadable. She had said little during the proceedings, her lawyer advising her to remain calm. She had always known that silence was part of her strength. Yet her daughter, sitting bravely in the witness stand, seemed determined to break that silence in her defense. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "All right, sweetheart," he said, his voice surprisingly soft compared to his sharp manner earlier with the lawyers. "Tell us, in your own words, why you believe your mother is the better guardian for you." The girl swallowed hard, her throat dry. She looked at her father briefly, then turned back to the judge. Her voice trembled at first, but gained strength with each word. "Because my mom is strong. She's not like other moms. The girl paused, took a shaky breath, and then declared, "She's a Navy SEAL." The courtroom erupted in whispers, a wave of murmurs sweeping through the benches. Some smirked, others chuckled, and a few shook their heads in disbelief. The father's lawyer raised an eyebrow, half amused, half incredulous, and leaned toward his client with a smug grin. Judge Hargrove blinked, then leaned back in his chair, lips curling upward into a chuckle that soon grew into full laughter. He shook his head slowly, tapping his gavel lightly on the bench as if to bring order not to the room, but to his own amusement. "A Navy SEAL?" he repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. "My dear, that's a very creative story. But let's try to stick to the truth here." The girl didn't flinch. Her small hands gripped the armrests tighter, and her eyes, no longer nervous, hardened with determination. "It is the truth," she said firmly, her voice echoing louder than her size should have allowed. The judge raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Sweetheart, Navy SEALs are, well, they're not women. They're some of the toughest men in the military. I'm afraid you've been watching too many movies." He smiled at the gallery, earning a few polite chuckles. But the girl refused to back down. She leaned forward in her chair, her voice clear and sharp. "My mom is a SEAL. She trained harder than anyone. She can swim for hours. She can fight. She can survive anywhere. She's not lying. You're the one who doesn't believe her." Her words silenced a few of the whispers. A couple of spectators even exchanged curious glances. The father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tightening. His lawyer quickly stood, addressing the court. "Your Honor, clearly this child has been misled. The mother must have filled her head with stories, fantasies even, to manipulate the proceedings. I'd ask that her statement be struck from the record. The judge waved a dismissive hand, still half smiling. Relax, counselor. Children often say things they don't fully understand. Let's not make a federal case out of her imagination. But the girl's mother raised her eyes for the first time during the hearing. She didn't speak, she didn't have to. Her gaze, calm yet piercing, met her daughter's across the room. It was a silent exchange, one filled with understanding. The girl drew strength from it, her small shoulders straightening as if standing at attention. The judge sighed and scribbled something in his notes, clearly preparing to move the case along. Yet the little girl spoke again, her voice carrying a weight far beyond her years. "You're laughing," she said, staring at the judge. "But you won't laugh when you see her walk through that door." Her words sent a ripple through the courtroom. A few gasped, others smirked, dismissing it as childish bravado. But there was something in the girl's tone steady, certain, unshakable, that made even the judge pause for just a moment. The father rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath, "She's delusional." His lawyer nodded eagerly, ready to pounce on the supposed absurdity. But the girl's unwavering stare unsettled them. Judge Hargrove leaned forward again, folding his hands. His smile had faded slightly, replaced by mild curiosity. "And what exactly do you mean by that, young lady?" he asked. The girl tilted her head, her expression firm. "I mean that you'll see. My mom isn't just any mom. She's brave. She's stronger than all of you in this room. And she's coming. With her team." The room fell into uneasy silence. For the first time, doubt flickered across the judge's face. He didn't fully believe her, but he couldn't ignore the quiet authority in her words either. The mother, still seated, allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile, so small it was almost invisible. She didn't need to reveal anything yet. Her daughter had said enough. And in that moment, though no one realized it, the balance of the courtroom had already shifted. The laughter had cracked, and silence was beginning to creep in, waiting for the doors to open. To the outside world, she was nothing more than a woman living an ordinary suburban life. Her name was Emily Carter. Neighbors knew her as polite, but private. She exchanged occasional greetings while watering her plants, sometimes waved when dropping her daughter off at school, and once in a while volunteered for bake sales, though she was known more for buying cookies than baking them. To teachers and parents at the school, she seemed distant but caring, someone who loved her daughter fiercely, but kept her own life guarded. She wasn't the mom who lingered for playground gossip or weekend barbecues. She came, she went. She disappeared into her quiet house at the end of the street. Most assumed she worked a demanding job, maybe in government, maybe something corporate, something that left little time for mingling. Few dared to ask, and Emily never offered more than a polite smile and a vague, "I work odd hours." What they didn't know, what almost no one outside her unit knew, was the truth. Emily was one of the most rigorously trained operators in the United States military. It had started years earlier, before her daughter was even born. Emily had been an athlete in college, excelling in endurance sports. She was the type who thrived in the cold, in mud, in exhaustion. While others quit, she kept going. Her professors admired her discipline. Her teammates marveled at her grit. But Emily craved something beyond medals and trophies. She wanted to test herself against the impossible. When she applied for Navy training, she was met with skepticism. Women attempting to break into the ranks of special operations were often dismissed, criticized, and judged long before they ever set foot in the training compound. But Emily didn't care about the noise. She trained relentlessly, running miles before dawn, swimming in freezing lakes, carrying weights on her back until her muscles burned. When she entered basic underwater demolition SEAL, Bud's training. Most doubted she'd last a week. But day after day, Emily proved them wrong. She endured Hell Week, where sleep deprivation, constant cold, and brutal physical tasks pushed even the strongest candidates to their limits. She learned to operate in pitch-black water, to fight exhaustion until her body shook uncontrollably, to carry not only her own weight, but the weight of teammates who faltered. When men twice her size collapsed, Emily pressed forward, her quiet determination more powerful than raw muscle. By the time she completed training, she had done what few thought possible, earned her place in the elite brotherhood of Navy SEALs. She didn't boast about it. She didn't need to. Her achievement spoke for itself. Years later, when her daughter was born, Emily's life shifted. Her career, once driven purely by the challenge of serving her country, now became intertwined with the need to protect the small life in her arms. Many would have left the service, chosen a safer path, but Emily wasn't built for easy roads. She wanted her daughter to grow up knowing strength wasn't limited by gender or by fear. But there was a cost. Emily's work meant long absences, missions she couldn't speak of, nights when her daughter cried, asking why Mommy wasn't home. The pain of leaving was sharp, but Emily carried it with the same discipline she carried through every operation. For her, silence was part of the duty. She never wore her uniform in public. She never bragged about missions or displayed medals. To her, secrecy wasn't just a requirement, it was a shield for her daughter. If people didn't know, then her child was safer. Still, there were glimpses of the truth, subtle and fleeting, that her daughter picked up on. Sometimes, early in the morning, the girl would wake to the sound of water splashing in the backyard pool. Peeking through the blinds, she'd see her mother swimming lap after lap, breath steady, arms slicing through the water with mechanical precision, long after any ordinary swimmer would have tired. Other times, she'd watch her mother sprint down the street, a weighted vest strapped to her chest, sweat pouring but pace unbroken. Once, after a storm, when a tree limb crashed onto their roof, Emily climbed up without hesitation. She balanced herself with the ease of a gymnast, lifting the heavy branch and clearing it in minutes, while neighbors stood below, stunned at her strength. And then there were the scars. Small ones at first, faint lines along her arms, a jagged mark across her ribs. Emily brushed them off, telling her daughter they were from clumsy accidents or kitchen mishaps. But the girl wasn't convinced. She noticed how her mother never flinched in pain, how she carried herself with the alertness of a soldier, even in a grocery store, scanning exits, watching crowds. Emily's daughter knew the truth long before Emily ever admitted it aloud. She didn't need a declaration. She had witnessed enough to understand. Yet the outside world remained blind. To them, Emily was the quiet mom who didn't quite fit the suburban mold. The father used this secrecy against her in court, painting her as absent, unreliable, unwilling to share details of her life. She disappears for weeks at a time, he argued. She can't explain where she goes. That's no way to raise a child. The judge had nodded, listening carefully. On paper, Emily looked like a puzzle missing pieces. Her absences were unexplained, her occupation vague, her lifestyle unconventional. What the judge didn't see, what no one in that courtroom saw, was the other side of Emily's life. The countless missions where she and her team slipped into hostile territory, gathering intelligence that kept American cities safe. The nights where she carried wounded comrades through mud and fire, refusing to leave anyone behind. The moments where her skill had meant the difference between life and death for soldiers who never even learned her name. She had endured betrayal, danger, and the weight of decisions no civilian could imagine. And yet, after each mission, she came home, washed the dirt from her skin, tied her daughter's shoelaces, and kissed her goodnight as if nothing had happened. Now, in the courtroom, Emily sat silently while her daughter spoke. The judge's laughter stung, though she didn't show it. She had been underestimated her whole life. She had been doubted, mocked, dismissed, and every time she had proven them wrong. Her daughter's courage was a mirror of her own, and though Emily longed to speak up, she stayed quiet. Timing was everything. Her life had taught her patience, the importance of striking at the right moment. The truth would come. And when it did, no amount of laughter, skepticism, or courtroom arrogance would erase it. The witness chair felt enormous beneath her. The polished wood was cold under her palms, and the faint scent of dust and varnish mixed with the sharper smell of the lawyer's cologne as he paced nearby. The girl shifted nervously, but did not look away from the judge. All her life, adults had spoken for her. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, and now her father, all of them seemed to believe that children's voices carried little weight, that their words were fragile and easily dismissed. But she was tired of being silent. This time, she would defend her mother herself. The judge cleared his throat. "Young lady, let's try again. Tell us why you think your mother should be the one to raise you." Her small hands trembled on the armrests, but her voice came steady. "Because she's not weak like you all think. She's strong. She's my hero. She's a Navy SEAL." The courtroom rippled with laughter, again snickers from the gallery, even a chuckle from the father's lawyer. Her father smirked, shaking his head as if he pitied her for being so naive. But the girl didn't cry. She didn't lower her gaze. Instead, she leaned forward in her chair, her voice firm. "You laugh because you don't know her. You don't know what she does when no one's watching. You don't see the scars. You don't hear her cry when she thinks I'm asleep. You don't see how much she's given up just to keep me safe." The lawyer stepped forward, his tone sharp and dismissive. "Sweetheart, no one is doubting that you love your mother. But let's be realistic. You're saying things you don't understand. You're a child. Perhaps your mother," he cast a glance toward Emily, "has filled your head with stories." A girl snapped her head toward him, eyes blazing. "She doesn't tell me stories. She doesn't have to. I see it. I know it." The lawyer smirked, pressing on. "Really? And what proof do you have, little one? Did she tell you about these supposed secret missions? Did she parade around the house in camouflage?" Her face flushed, but not with shame, with anger. "She doesn't tell me anything because she's not allowed to. But I know. I've seen her train. I've seen her swim until her lips turn blue. I've seen her run until her shoes fall apart. I've seen her hands, rough and cut, like she's been through things no one talks about." The gallery shifted uncomfortably. Some were amused, but others grew quiet. There was something in her tone, in the fierce certainty of a child too honest to be lying, that tugged at them. The judge leaned back, his face stern now. "Miss Carter," he said, trying to soften his tone, "it's a very serious thing to make claims in this courtroom. This isn't a place for imagination." Her chin lifted stubbornly. "I'm not imagining. You just don't believe me because you think only men can be strong. But I've seen my mom stronger than any man. I've seen her do things that would scare you." The judge's pen stilled in his hand. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Her father suddenly rose, frustration boiling in his voice. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. She's just a little girl repeating nonsense. My ex-wife has brainwashed her." "No!" the girl shouted, startling the room into silence. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice carried the force of a storm. "She didn't brainwash me. She raised me. She protected me. She's the only reason I feel safe at night." The judge tapped his gavel lightly. Order in the court, but his voice lacked the bite it had before. Something about the girl's words had shifted the tone. The father's lawyer tried again, circling like a predator. "So you claim your mother is this secret warrior, This Navy SEAL. Tell us then, what does she do when she disappears? Where does she go? The girl bit her lip, thinking. She didn't know details her mother never gave them. But she remembered the nights when Emily would kneel by her bed, tucking her in before leaving. She remembered the way her mother's eyes softly with love, yet carried a shadow of something darker, something dangerous. She goes where she's needed, the girl said finally, her voice steady. She goes to keep people safe. She goes so that kids like me can sleep at night without being scared. She goes because she's brave, the lawyer smirked. That's very poetic, young lady, but it's hardly evidence. The girl's small fists balled up in her lap. I don't need evidence. I know the truth. You can laugh at me, you can laugh at her, but when you see her walk in here, you'll stop laughing. The courtroom stilled again. It was the second time she had said those words, and this time her voice carried an unshakable conviction. For the first time, Judge Hargrove looked uncertain. He stared at the girl, at her unwavering expression, then at Emily, who remained calm and silent at her table. She hadn't moved, hadn't protested, hadn't encouraged or denied her daughter's words. That silence made the claim harder to dismiss. The girl turned to face the judge directly, her voice softer now, almost pleading. You don't understand what it's like to watch people say bad things about your mom when you know she's the bravest person alive. You don't understand how hard it is to sit here and hear them say she's not good enough, when I know she's given everything for me. She doesn't need to prove anything to me. She already has. But if you don't believe me, just wait. You'll see. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. The father shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence shaken. The lawyer cleared his throat, preparing another rebuttal, but even he sensed the atmosphere had changed. The gallery was quiet now, no longer laughing, caught between doubt and curiosity. Judge Hargrove leaned back in his chair, folding his hands, his face no longer amused. His voice was careful, measured. Very well. Let us continue. But I remind you, child, this is a court of law, not a place for dramatics. The girl simply nodded. Then you'll want the truth. And she is the truth. Her words, though spoken by a child, carried the weight of something far greater, an unshakable faith in her mother, forged not by stories, but by lived moments only the two of them shared. And in that moment, even as the judge tried to resume control, the courtroom had already shifted. The defense of a daughter had planted doubt, had cracked the walls of disbelief. The laughter that once filled the room had been replaced with something else, anticipation. Because somewhere deep down, even the judge couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the little girl wasn't lying. The weight of the girl's words still lingered in the courtroom like smoke after a fire. Her declaration had silenced the whispers, dimmed the laughter, and left an uneasy quiet hanging between the polished wooden walls. Judge William Hargrove shifted in his chair, his robe rustling faintly as he leaned forward, folding his hands atop the bench. His eyes narrowed on the little girl, not with cruelty, but with doubt sharpened by decades of skepticism. Child, he began, his voice patient but tinged with condescension. Do you know what you're saying? Do you even understand what a Navy SEAL is? The girl didn't hesitate. Yes, they're the strongest. They're the ones who go first when no one else will. They're the ones who protect people even if it means they might not come back. The judge's eyebrows arched slightly. For a moment, he was impressed by the clarity in her answer, but his doubt quickly returned. And you believe, he said slowly, that your mother is one of them? The girl sat taller in the chair, her voice firm. I don't believe it. I know it. A ripple of uneasy laughter spread across the gallery again. Some shook their heads. Others whispered about how children had overactive imaginations. The father smirked smugly, leaning closer to his lawyer, muttering something under his breath. His lawyer nodded, ready to pounce. The judge, however, didn't smile this time. His lips pressed into a thin line, and his voice took on a harder edge. Miss Carter, there are truths and there are fantasies. I've presided over this courtroom long enough to tell the difference. Navy SEALs are elite, specialized warriors. Their training is brutal, their lives dangerous. And frankly, he stopped, pausing, before letting out a dry laugh. I don't recall any cases of a little girl's mother sitting here before me while secretly serving in one of the most dangerous military units in the world. I'm sorry, but that's not how life works. His words carried the smug certainty of a man used to being right, a man whose authority was rarely questioned. The father's lawyer stood quickly, seizing the moment. Exactly, Your Honor. This child is confused. She's been fed stories, led to believe fantasies about her mother. And while I don't fault her for wanting to see her mother as some kind of hero, we must deal with facts, not fairy tales. The girl gripped the arms of the chair tighter, her knuckles white. Her small frame trembled, not from fear, but from frustration boiling just beneath the surface. She wanted to shout, to scream that they were all blind. But her voice, when it came, was sharp and steady. You don't know her. You don't know what she's done. You sit there laughing at me, but you've never seen her swim in freezing water until her lips turn purple. You've never seen her carry people twice her size. You've never seen her wake up before the sun and keep going when everyone else quits. I have. The room shifted again, the audience caught between disbelief and the conviction in her voice. Even the judge hesitated, his gavel resting idle in his hand. The father slammed his palm against the table. This is absurd, he barked. She's making a mockery of this court. My ex-wife is no Navy SEAL, she's a liar, and she's using our daughter to spin a fantasy so she doesn't lose custody. Emily Carter remained silent at her table. She hadn't moved since the hearing began. Her calm presence was almost unnerving in contrast to the storm building around her. Her lawyer placed a gentle hand on her arm, silently reminding her not to speak yet, not to break the strategy of patience. The judge nodded slowly, trying to regain control. He adjusted his glasses and leaned toward the girl again. Sweetheart, I'm not laughing at you because I want to hurt you. But I need you to understand, sometimes children confuse imagination with reality. It's natural. We tell stories, we see things we don't fully understand, and we create our own truths. There's no shame in that. Her gaze was steady, unflinching. I'm not confused, she said, each word deliberate. You are. The courtroom went silent. No one moved. Even the judge froze for a moment, caught off guard by the boldness of the statement. Her father gaped, face red with fury. This is outrageous. She's disrespecting the court. But the judge didn't respond immediately. He studied the girl, then shifted his eyes toward Emily, who continued to sit still, her face unreadable, her eyes calm yet sharp. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, the judge exhaled slowly, breaking the stillness. Well then, he said carefully, if your mother is truly what you claim, then where is the proof? The girl didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply lifted her chin and answered with certainty. She'll bring it. She'll bring them. The words hung in the air, electric and chilling. A murmur swept through the room again, but this time it wasn't laughter. It was unease, curiosity, even a flicker of fear. The father's lawyer scoffed loudly, breaking the tension. Your Honor, we can't possibly entertain this. It's a waste of the court's time. We're here to decide custody, not listen to the fantasies of a child who clearly doesn't understand reality. But the judge didn't immediately dismiss it. Something in the girl's unshakable tone gnawed at him, something he couldn't quite explain. He was a man of facts, a man who lived his career grounded in the evidence placed before him. Yet the little girl's defiance planted a splinter of doubt in his certainty. He cleared his throat. "That will be enough for now. We'll take a short recess." His gavel tapped once, not with authority, but with hesitation. The courtroom stirred to life, people standing, stretching, whispering urgently among themselves. The father stormed toward his lawyer, hissing complaints, his voice low but heated. The gallery buzzed with gossip, speculation filling the air. Emily rose quietly from her chair, smoothing the crease in her slacks, her face calm. Her daughter looked toward her, their eyes locking for a brief moment. No words passed between them, but none were needed. The girl's defense had been bold, fierce, and unshakable. Emily's silence had been deliberate. And together, though the judge didn't yet know it, they were preparing to turn the courtroom upside down. Because soon, the sound of boots would echo through those doors. And when it did, authority itself would be humbled. The recess had done little to calm the storm in the courtroom. If anything, it had only stoked the fire. People returned to their benches, buzzing with speculation, whispering about the girl's bold words and the judge's awkward silence. Some scoffed, certain the child was delusional. Others, however, were unsettled. Something in her conviction made it hard to laugh too easily. Judge Hargrove returned to the bench, his expression stiff. He tapped his gavel once, calling the room to order. "Let's proceed," he said briskly, though his voice lacked its usual authority. The girl's father leaned toward his lawyer, muttering something under his breath. The lawyer gave a confident nod and stood, preparing to resume his argument. "Your Honor, before we continue, I'd like to remind the court of the importance of separating fact from fiction. While I understand children often exaggerate, His words were cut short by a sound that no one expected. Thud. It was faint at first, a low, steady rhythm echoing from the hallway outside. The gallery stilled, turning their heads toward the double doors at the back of the courtroom. The sound grew louder, boots striking the marble floor in perfect unison. Thud, thud. The murmurs stopped. The judge frowned, confused, his gavel hovering uncertainly above the bench. The father shifted uncomfortably, his face paling slightly. The girl sat up straighter in her chair, her eyes fixed on the doors, her lips curling into the faintest smile. And then, with a sudden creak, the heavy wooden doors swung open. They entered like shadows carved from steel. A team of uniformed Navy SEALs marched into the courtroom, their boots striking the floor in flawless rhythm. The air seemed to thin, the weight of their presence pressing down on everyone in the room. Their faces were calm, unreadable, their eyes sharp and focused. At their center walked Emily Carter. Gone was the quiet suburban mother in slacks and a blouse. Now she stood in full dress uniform, the trident insignia gleaming proudly on her chest. Her posture was rigid, her steps precise, her presence commanding. The laughter, the doubt, the dismissive smirks, all of it evaporated the moment she appeared. The gallery gasped audibly. Some rose to their feet instinctively, others clutched their mouths in shock. The father's lawyer stumbled back a step, his earlier smugness vanishing as quickly as smoke in wind. The judge froze, his jaw slack, the gavel slipping from his fingers and landing with a dull clatter on the bench. His eyes darted to the insignia, then to the men flanking her, then back to Emily herself. Emily stopped at the center of the courtroom, her team forming a silent line behind her. The weight of authority that had once belonged to the judge now shifted undeniably to her. She saluted crisply, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. "Your Honor." Her tone was calm but firm, the voice of someone accustomed to speaking in life or death situations. The judge blinked, fumbling for words. "Mrs. Carter." His throat tightened. Is this real?" Emily's gaze never wavered. "I serve in silence," because my country requires it. I do not speak of my work, nor do I ask for recognition. But today, my daughter's honor is at stake. She spoke the truth, even when it cost her ridicule. And I will not let that truth be buried beneath disbelief. Her words cut through the air like a blade. The little girl's eyes brimmed with tears, not from sadness, but from pride. She had waited for this moment, had endured the judge's laughter and the lawyer's mockery, knowing that one day her mother's strength would no longer be hidden. The father sat frozen, his face pale. He tried to speak, but no words came. His lawyer stammered, searching for an objection. But what could he possibly say? The proof stood right before them, undeniable, flanked by the nation's most elite warriors. The judge leaned back in his chair, suddenly feeling very small beneath the weight of the truth. He removed his glasses, rubbed his temples, and exhaled slowly. "My God," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Emily's eyes softened as she turned briefly toward her daughter. The faintest smile tugged at her lips, a smile only her daughter would recognize, the smile of a mother, not a soldier. Then she faced the judge once more. "With respect, sir, I do not come here to boast or to intimidate. I come here because my daughter's words were laughed at, dismissed, as though truth has no place in this room. But truth is not dependent on belief. It stands on its own. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Not a cough, not a shuffle of papers, not a whisper. The judge swallowed hard, finally managing to speak. "Mrs. Carter, forgive me. I had no idea." Emily inclined her head slightly. "You weren't meant to. That is the nature of my duty." The father finally found his voice, rising to his feet, his tone desperate. "This doesn't change anything. Being some soldier doesn't make her a fit mother." The gallery erupted in gasps at his words, the audacity jarring after what they had just witnessed. Emily didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice. She simply turned her head toward him, her eyes steady, her silence louder than any rebuttal. It was the little girl who spoke instead. She turned in her chair, facing her father directly, her voice small but razor-sharp. "It changes everything. Because now you can't pretend anymore." The father faltered, his mouth opening and closing, but nothing came out. The judge lifted his gavel again, this time with reverence rather than authority. He tapped it once, softly. "Order," he said, though the room was already silent. He looked at Emily, then at her daughter, then back at the stunned gallery. The authority he once held had shifted, and he knew it. For the first time in his long career, a case had left him speechless. And all it had taken was the sound of boots entering his courtroom. For a long moment, the courtroom seemed suspended in time, as though the very air itself was holding its breath. The presence of Emily Carter in her Navy SEAL uniform had already shattered disbelief, but the silence that followed demanded more than shock, it demanded understanding. Judge Hargrove adjusted his glasses, his hands trembling slightly as he searched for words. The weight of his earlier laughter bore down on him like a guilty chain. At last, he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter," he said slowly, "I owe you and your daughter an apology. I allowed my assumptions to blind me. Emily raised a hand gently, not to silence him, but to ease the burden from his voice. "Your Honor, you need not apologize to me. I am used to doubt. It follows me everywhere I go." Her gaze swept the courtroom, steady and unflinching. "What matters is not the insult to me, but the lesson for her." She turned her head toward her daughter, who sat on the witness stand with her chin high, eyes glistening with pride. The girl's small frame seemed larger now, filled with the vindication of truth. Emily faced the judge again. "You doubted her. You laughed at her. But she stood firm. She did what most grown men and women fail to do. She spoke the truth without wavering, even when surrounded by disbelief. The gallery murmured softly, the weight of her words sinking in. Even those who had scoffed earlier found themselves shifting uncomfortably, their own assumptions reflected back at them. The father shifted uneasily, his face flushing with frustration. He muttered, "This doesn't make her a saint. She hides things. She lies." His lawyer touched his arm, urging him to stop, but his bitterness wouldn't be contained. A mother who keeps secrets is not a mother fit to raise a child. Emily turned toward him, her movements slow, deliberate. "You speak of secrets," she said quietly, her voice cutting sharper than any shout, as though secrecy is the same as deceit. "But do you understand what secrecy demands? It means sacrificing recognition. It means missing birthdays and holidays, leading without goodbye, carrying the weight of missions that will never be told. It means loving your child so much that you're willing to let her think you are ordinary, because her safety depends on it." Her daughter's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to cry. She knew her mother's words were not just for the courtroom, but for her. Every unexplained absence, every vague excuse, every mysterious bruise or scar now carried a new meaning. The father looked away, unable to hold Emily's gaze. His arrogance, so loud at the start of the hearing, now seemed paper-thin. Emily took a breath, then stepped closer to the bench, addressing the judge with quiet authority. "Women like me are rare, yes, but rarity is not impossibility. I endured the same training as every man beside me. I carried the same weight, swam the same miles, endured the same cold. When my body begged me to stop, I kept moving. When others quit, I refused. That is what it means to be a SEAL. And I did not do it because I wanted glory, I did it because I wanted my daughter to grow up in a country where she never had to fear the sound of war at her doorstep." The room hung on her words. Every syllable carried not only conviction, but history, the history of her sacrifices, her resilience, her refusal to accept limits. One of the SEALs standing behind her shifted slightly, his decorated uniform catching the light. His eyes scanned the gallery with the alertness of a man trained never to let down his guard. The sight of him standing there, silent but solid, underscored the weight of Emily's truth. She wasn't alone in her fight. She carried the respect of those who had fought beside her. The judge leaned back, his face pale. He whispered almost to himself, "I doubted, because I could not imagine. But the failure was in my imagination, not in your truth." Emily inclined her head. "Exactly. The world is quick to laugh at what it does not expect, and quick to dismiss what does not fit into its narrow boxes. But every stereotype is a cage, and cages are meant to be broken." Her words sent a ripple through the gallery. Women in the audience exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, their faces alight with something between awe and gratitude. Men, too, found themselves stirred, forced to question the quiet biases they had carried without ever acknowledging them. The girl shifted in her seat, her small voice cutting through the silence. "I told you she was strong." The judge turned his gaze toward her, his sternness softened. "Yes, child," he said gently. "You did." The father tried again, desperate, clinging to the fragments of control he thought he had left. "So what? So she wears a uniform? So she hides behind her medals? What does that prove about her being a good mother? What about the nights she wasn't home? What about the times she left you alone?" His words struck like daggers, but Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she walked closer to her daughter, kneeling beside her so they were eye level. She placed a hand on her child's shoulder. "Do you remember what I told you, sweetheart?" Emily asked softly. The girl nodded, her voice steady. "You said sometimes love means being far away. Because love isn't always about being next to someone, it's about protecting them, even if they never know how." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, though she blinked them back. She kissed her daughter's forehead gently, then rose to face the courtroom once more. "That," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the room, "is what makes me a mother." The gallery erupted into quiet murmurs again, but this time they weren't scoffs. They were gasps of admiration, whispers of respect, even the sound of a few stifled tears. The judge lifted his gavel, but this time not to silence the room. He held it almost reverently, as though afraid to tarnish the gravity of the moment. His gaze lingered on Emily, then shifted to the child. "This court has been humbled today," he said slowly, his voice cracking ever so slightly. "I see now that courage does not always wear the face we expect. Sometimes it comes dressed in quiet sacrifice. Sometimes it comes in the form of a child who refuses to let truth be silenced." Emily stood tall, her uniform catching the dim light of the courtroom. Her presence had broken the stereotype, not only of who could serve, but of what motherhood meant. She had turned doubt into respect, silence into truth. And though the case was not yet decided, one thing was certain. No one in that courtroom would ever forget the day a little girl's words proved stronger than the assumptions of an entire room. The courtroom, once filled with laughter and murmurs, had transformed into a sanctuary of silence. Every person in attendance knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that stretched far beyond the walls of family law. It wasn't just a custody case anymore. It was a reckoning, a confrontation between assumption and reality, arrogance and humility. Judge William Hargrove sat back in his chair, staring at Emily Carter as if seeing her for the very first time. He was a man who prided himself on his wisdom, his ability to separate fact from fiction, truth from lies. Yet in one afternoon, a little girl and her mother had undone decades of certainty. The gavel rested heavy in his hand, but he didn't strike it. For once in his career, silence seemed the only judgment he could render. He cleared his throat, his voice faltering. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly, "forgive me if I seem at a loss. I have spent years demanding proof, demanding evidence, and here I find myself humbled by the fact that truth stood before me all along. I laughed at your daughter. I disrespected you without cause. And now, I struggle to find words that might undo what has already been done." Emily's expression was steady, but her eyes betrayed a glimmer of empathy. She had dealt with skepticism before on training fields, in briefing rooms, even among her own comrades. But something about the judge's raw honesty softened her stance. She gave a small nod. "Your Honor, there is no undoing doubt. There is only learning from it." Her words landed heavier than any rebuke could have. The judge lowered his gaze, ashamed. For the first time in decades on the bench, he felt not like the arbiter of justice, but its student. The girl's small voice cut through the silence, fragile yet firm. "You didn't believe me. You laughed." The words hit harder than Emily's, sharper than any reprimand. Judge Hargrove looked at her, his face softening. "You are right, child, and I was wrong." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. "You have taught me more about truth and courage today than I have learned in all my years wearing this robe. And for that, I thank you." The gallery shifted. Some people blinked away tears. Others nodded solemnly, as though they too had been humbled. The father, however, was not moved. His face flushed crimson, his jaw clenched. "This is a circus," he spat, rising to his feet. "So she shows up in uniform with her little entourage. What does that prove? It doesn't make her a mother. It doesn't erase the nights she was gone, or the lies she told to cover it." The judge lifted a hand, but before he could speak, Emily did. Her voice was calm, but unyielding. "What it proves," she said, turning toward him, "is that you underestimated not just me, but her." She gestured to her daughter. "You think being present in body makes you a parent. But being present in spirit, in sacrifice, That is something you have never understood." Her daughter turned toward her father, her small voice trembling yet unwavering. "You laughed at me too. You said Mom couldn't be what she is. You told me I was imagining things. But I wasn't, and you knew it. You just didn't want to believe it." The father faltered, his bluster collapsing under the weight of his child's words. He tried to speak, but found no footing, no defense. His eyes darted toward his lawyer, but the man had no counsel to give. Judge Hargrove tapped his gavel lightly, not in command, but to break the unbearable tension. "That is enough," he said softly. His eyes swept the courtroom, settling on the father. "You speak of lies and absence, but what I see here is a woman who sacrificed more than most can imagine, and a child who has learned resilience in the face of doubt. This court is not blind to hardship, but neither is it blind to truth." The father sank back into his chair, his rage simmering into silence. Emily stood tall, her presence unwavering. She had not raised her voice, had not begged for recognition. She had simply stood in truth, and truth had done the rest. The judge let the silence stretch again, unwilling to break the spell too quickly. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, reverent. "For years, I thought my gavel was the loudest sound in this room. Today I realize it is silence, the silence that comes when truth enters and demands no applause, no defense. It simply stands, undeniable." He turned toward Emily's daughter. "And you, child, will carry this day with you for the rest of your life. Remember it not as the day they laughed, but as the day they stopped." The girl smiled faintly, pride glowing on her face. She reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it tightly. Emily returned the squeeze, her strong fingers wrapping around the small hand that had carried so much weight in this courtroom. The seals behind her remained silent, statues of discipline, but even their stoic faces softened as they witnessed the bond between mother and daughter. They had seen combat, they had seen sacrifice, but what they saw here was something purer, stronger, a love that endured against all odds. The judge placed his gavel down gently, almost reverently, as though it no longer belonged to him, but to the truth that had just unfolded. "This court," he said finally, "has no further questions." And for the first time in his long career, William Hargrove, the man who prided himself on control, on authority, on certainty, sat in silence, knowing that silence itself was the only verdict worthy of the truth. The air inside the courtroom had shifted. Where once there had been laughter and disbelief, now there was reverence. It was not the kind born from fear or command, but the kind that grows when truth leaves no room for denial. Emily Carter stood tall at the center of it all, her daughter's hand clasped in hers, the seals behind her like shadows of steel. They had said nothing, yet their presence spoke volumes. This was no performance, no stunt, no trick. It was reality raw, unvarnished, undeniable. Judge Hargrove leaned forward, his elbows resting heavily on the bench. His eyes, once narrowed with skepticism, now shone with something far gentler. "This court will deliberate on the custody matter further," he said slowly, carefully, "but let it be known on the record that the credibility of this child and her mother is not in question. Their truth stands. It wasn't the final decision, but it was enough. For the little girl, it was vindication. For Emily, it was respect not demanded, not forced, but finally given." The gavel struck once, a soft echo that seemed almost ceremonial. "We are adjourned," but no one moved. Not immediately. The gallery sat in stunned silence, reluctant to break the spell. It was as though they all knew they had witnessed something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. At last, Emily turned, guiding her daughter toward the exit. The seals fell into step behind them, their boots clicking in perfect rhythm. People parted to let them through, their faces a mixture of awe and shame, admiration and humility. As they walked, a voice rose from the gallery. It was soft at first, then stronger, filled with sincerity. "Thank you." Then another. "God bless you." And another. "Respect." Soon the room echoed with murmured gratitude, not loud but sincere, a chorus of voices acknowledging a truth they had once dismissed. The father sat motionless at his table, his head bowed. Whatever fight he had entered the courtroom with was gone, deflated under the weight of his own disbelief. He did not call out to his daughter, nor to his ex-wife. For the first time, he was silent. Outside the courthouse, the September air was cool and crisp. The sun cast long shadows on the steps as Emily and her daughter emerged, still hand in hand. Reporters had gathered, drawn by whispers of what had unfolded inside. But the seals formed a quiet barrier, their expressions unreadable, their discipline unbroken. Cameras clicked, voices called out, but Emily ignored them all. She bent down, looking her daughter in the eyes. "Are you okay?" The girl nodded, her smile wide, her eyes shimmering with pride. "I told them," she whispered. "I told them the truth." Emily pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. For years she had carried the burden of secrecy, shielding her child from the dangers that came with her role. But in doing so, she had also shielded her from recognition. Today, her daughter had stepped into that gap, standing as a defender of her mother's honor when no one else would. "You were braver than I have ever been," Emily said softly, her voice breaking. Her daughter shook her head. "No, Mom, I just learned it from you." The seal standing closest to them cleared his throat quietly, a rare flicker of emotion breaking through his stoicism. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but firm, "permission to speak freely?" Emily nodded. He looked down at the little girl. "You've got your mother's backbone. Don't ever lose it," the girl grinned, her chest swelling with pride. For her, the words of SEAL were like receiving a medal of her own. Emily rose, her hand never leaving her daughter's. She turned to the team. "Thank you for coming, for standing with me." The leader of the unit gave a small nod. "We don't leave our own behind. Not in battle. Not in life." With that, they saluted her, sharp and precise, before dispersing quietly, melting back into the city as though they had never been there. For Emily, the moment wasn't about medals or uniforms. It was about the bond between a mother and her child. Her daughter had carried her truth into the light, and the world had finally listened. That evening, back at home, Emily sat on the porch while her daughter played in the yard. The house was small, modest, but it was theirs a place of safety in a life that had so often been marked by danger. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Emily found herself reflecting. She thought of the judge's laughter, the courtroom's disbelief, the father's scorn. She thought of the sound of boots echoing through the hallway, the shift of air when truth entered the room. And she thought of the silence that followed, the silence of respect. Her daughter ran up the porch steps, breathless and smiling, holding a handful of wildflowers. "For you," she said, placing them in her mother's hands. Emily's throat tightened. She pulled her daughter into her lap, holding her close as the night settled around them. "Someday," she whispered, "you'll tell this story to someone else. And they'll listen. Because of you." The girl rested her head against her mother's chest, her voice muffled but clear. "I don't care if anyone listens. I just want them to know you're the strongest." Emily kissed the top of her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No," she said softly, "we're the strongest. Together." And in that quiet moment, beneath the fading light of day, Emily Carter realized that her legacy was not in the missions she had completed, the battles she had fought, or the sacrifices she had endured. Her true legacy was sitting in her lap, the child who had defended her truth, stood against ridicule, and emerged victorious. The courtroom had fallen silent. The judge had been humbled. The father had been silenced. But the world, Emily knew, would never laugh again. For they had all learned a lesson. Sometimes the strongest warriors don't carry their strength on their shoulders. They carry it in the hearts of those who believe in them. And sometimes the loudest verdict is not spoken with words, but with silence.